This morning's scripture reading comes from the book of Proverbs and contains selected proverbs on the theme of emotions. Even in laughter, the heart may ache, and the end of joy may be grief. The heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy. A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. A hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. This is God's word. You may be seated.
Well, thank you, Trudell, for that reading. Good morning, everyone. If I haven't met you yet, I'm Pastor Ben, and I want to begin this morning by admitting something that might sound perhaps a little bit strange to some of you. And that is that for the first several years that I lived as a follower of Jesus, I dreaded musical worship. Dreaded it. I became a Christian at age 19, and soon after that, maybe a couple months after that, I was invited along by a friend to her church and to her church's Wednesday night college ministry. It's called The Well. And so I would go there with her every Wednesday night. And every time that I went, I noticed this very similar pattern play itself out each time. There were maybe 300 or so college students. We were packed into this old sanctuary in Calvary Baptist Church. And as soon as the night would start and the lights went down and the band came on the stage, my heart would just start pounding and my mind would start racing. And I started to feel intensely uncomfortable in my own skin. Like, seriously, I wanted to be somewhere else. And that would go on for maybe 20, 25 minutes or so as the band played. And then finally, I could tell they always did 4 songs. So when the 4th song was wrapping up and the lights came back on and the college pastor came on the stage to begin his message, I would feel at ease and back to being like myself again. And my heart rate would decrease and it would feel better. And for a long time, this whole process, it just kind of confused me because I was growing to love Jesus, and I actually loved music and live music, and the setting was welcoming. And so it didn't have anything to do with that. And so what was it? And it wasn't until like years later that I kind of looked back and processed this whole experience and came to realize that my deep uncomfortability had nothing to do with the music or with the spiritual setting or with the church or with the pastor. It had everything to do with my own engagement with emotions. See, what happened was as the lights would go down and people would raise their hands and some of them would cry, they were very expressive, I felt like I was maybe on the outside of an experience looking in. I felt like there was something that everyone else was good at, namely emotions, that I seemed to be bad at. And it made me feel a lot of shame. You know, I wonder if some of you this morning have also felt a sense of shame around how you experience emotions. There may be some of you who feel it for the exact opposite reason from what I've just described. Maybe at a pivotal point in your life, or even repeatedly, someone close to you has said to you, "Stop being so emotional," or "You're being too emotional," by which they meant maybe irrational or unmoored. And so our experience of emotions, like whatever it has been, it often causes us to ask the question, is this how I'm supposed to be? Maybe we've never verbalized it that way, but the question of our hearts, is this how I'm supposed to be? We've been in this series together in Proverbs. We're calling it Walk This Way. And we're looking at the wisdom of this unique book of the Bible, the collected wisdom, on all these different spheres of life. So in recent weeks, we've talked, for example, about friendship or about parenting or work versus sloth. Or last week, we talked about how to make decisions. And this morning, we're talking about what does Proverbs have to say about our emotions. fewer things perplex us more than our own emotions, what they are communicating, how to relate to them. And similarly, fewer areas can be more easily misunderstood than our own emotions. And so this morning, if we can just get like a bit more of a handle on this, on what is God's wisdom, what is his design for why we have emotions, how to engage with them, it'll go a long way towards our lives feeling so much fuller and also freer. You know, throughout this series, we've defined wisdom this way. We've said wisdom is basically skill at navigating life the way that God's designed it. And as you see that definition on the screen, perhaps you think skill and emotion. Do those two things even go in the same sentence? Like emotions, I just kind of have them, or I don't, or I notice them. Is it possible to live skillfully with regard to your own emotions? We're going to argue this morning that yes, in fact, it is, and that's going to be our topic. So here's where we're going. I want us to discover this morning from the book of Proverbs 4 core insights about our emotions. 4 core insights that if we can grasp these, even just a bit more than we do now, I think it'll lead to flourishing and freedom in our lives. So we're going to see one at a time. 4 core insights from Proverbs about emotions. As usual, they're going to be on the screen. You might write them down and then you can return to them later, but let's just dive right into it. Here's the first insight. If you want to engage your emotions more skillfully, then you first need to understand why they're complicated. You need to understand why they're complicated. You know, our emotions, they can be complicated and confusing to us for many reasons, and Proverbs unpacks several of those reasons. Here's Proverbs 14:13. It says, even in laughter, the heart may ache, and the end of joy may be grief. Let's meditate on this one a little bit together. At minimum, this proverb is saying, our emotions can be mixed. It's possible to feel 2 different emotions at the exact same time, even 2 emotions that may seem to be contrary. Even in laughter, the heart may ache. It's also saying that one emotion may soon transition into another one. The end of joy may be grief. You could think of it almost like a color wheel. If you're here and you're in elementary school, maybe you had an art class, the teacher showed a color wheel. I remember getting this in like first grade where they tell you there's primary colors, and then out of those primary colors, you have secondary colors that are mixtures of the primary colors, and out of those secondary colors, you also have tertiary colors that are mixtures of the secondary colors, and on it goes. You could think of your emotions like this color wheel. Very rarely are you only experiencing red or yellow or blue, but more commonly it's some mixture of all of this. And if you think about it, if you reflect on your life, you'll see just how common it is for your emotions to be deeply mixed, right? You were overjoyed that you made the basketball team, finally, and yet at the exact same time as you're feeling that joy, you're feeling fear. Will I be good enough? Or you think about the night before your daughter begins kindergarten. You're joyful. You're celebrating her personality. You're proud of who she's becoming, but you're also sad that a previous season is gone and will never come back. And so Proverbs 14, even in laughter, the heart may ache, and the end of joy may be grief. Now, here's a question. Could this proverb be written in reverse? For example, even in heartache, the mouth may laugh, and the end of grief may be joy. I think it could, and it would still communicate a lot of truth. And yet, I also think it's written this way on purpose. Because this proverb is communicating that in this life, it is far more common for our more pleasant emotions to carry some degree of sadness or pain underneath them. Hence, the way it's actually written, even in laughter, the heart may ache. One of our elders here at Hope Church is a really gifted painter. And last year I asked him, hey, can you paint me a landscape for my office at church? And so he painted me this picture. I've got it on the screen. This is a landscape from northern New Mexico. And it was really cool because I got to see him painting it at various stages of its development while I was over at his house. And he clearly knew what he was doing. And one of the things that surprised me was when he first started painting this painting, he painted this entire scene in red. Like he painted the river in red, he painted even what will later become that cloud in the top right corner in red, he painted the sky in red, and then only after he had spent hours and hours painting this whole scene in red did he then layer on top all of the other colors. Apparently it's called an underpainting. I asked him about it this week, and so it's probably hard to tell from where you're sitting, but if you see the actual painting in my office and you look up closely at that white cloud in the corner, for example, you can actually see these little tinges of red in it. Or if you look at the little shrubs, the green shrubs on the bottom, they're a warmer green because there's red in the background. You can see red a little bit reflecting off the white parts of the river. And the reason they told me that you do an underpainting is because you want to have a certain color that brings out either warmth or coolness underneath the rest of the painting. All of this to say, Proverbs 14, it's saying that our experience of emotions is often like this. It's mixed, but there's often red in the underpainting. Now you might say, Pastor Ben, that's obvious to me. Like I didn't need to come to church this morning to understand everyone gets mixed emotions. That's a thing. Agreed. And yet, do you allow yourself to live as if this is true? Do you allow other people to live as if this is true? It's quite easy to heap undue guilt on yourself or on others simply for having mixed emotions. It's your son's wedding day. He's marrying a great woman, and yet you feel guilty for also feeling sad. Or your friend at work finally gets the job she's been hoping for, and on the day it comes time to pack up her office, you tell her, why don't you seem excited? We've been praying about this for months. Christians especially, we can struggle to kind of embrace mixed emotions because we often moralize the negative emotion or the harder emotion of the mixture. Like, if I was just more grateful, I wouldn't also be sad. Or if I loved God a bit more, I wouldn't also feel lonely because I'd be satisfied with Him. And yet part of engaging your emotions skillfully, it's simply understanding that they can be mixed. Notice, the proverb doesn't tell you to do anything. It's just describing a slice of reality. And so that's part of engaging our emotions more skillfully. Another reason why they can be complicated is because they're unique to us. Here's another proverb from the same chapter. It says, the heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy. This is saying there's a bitterness or a joy that is finely crafted to us as individuals. Its shape is unique. How we express it is unique. In a real way, we can't even speak of bitterness or joy, but Ben's bitterness or Ben's joy. When C.S. Lewis wrote a beautiful book about the grief that he experienced following the death of his wife, he very purposefully titled it not Grief Observed, but A Grief Observed. He was saying it's just one. It was a sample size of one. It was his. Sometimes, when we want to comfort someone, we say to them something like, I know exactly what you're feeling. And yet the truth is, you don't. You don't know exactly what they're feeling. Now, I'm not at all saying that we can't comfort someone by having gone through a very similar experience, but what we should do is on top of that, we should layer on a certain level of humility, a certain level of curiosity, because what you're experiencing is never truly exactly like what they're experiencing, you and someone else might both be lonely in your widowhood, but yours is not exactly like theirs. And so that's another reason why it can be confusing or complicated to us. Now, this is also why spouses can often be so perplexed with one another, because you could be feeling a very similar emotion as your spouse, and yet you experience it differently. You express it differently. It has a different shape and contour. The heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy. Here's one last reason why emotions can be complicated. It's simply because they're intertwined with our bodies. Right? The biblical anthropology, biblical view of who humans are says we are not just thinking creatures. We're not just minds on a stick, as one author has put it. We can't merely reduce our emotions to physiological events. That is not the view we have, and yet they are physiological. There are chemicals that fire in our bodies. Sometimes they even fire off in ways that we don't wish for or intend. And yet at the same time, they are also bodily. Proverbs 17:22 says, "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." Whatever else this is saying, at minimum, it's saying our emotions have an impact on our bodies. And oftentimes the reverse is true. Our bodies have an impact on our emotions. Sometimes you will feel certain emotions because of physiological and chemical factors. Again, by saying that, I'm not reducing it to that, but I'm saying you have to take it into consideration. If a mother gets postpartum depression, we don't moralize that, rightly so, because we are mind-body creatures. And so an element of engaging your emotions wisely is also asking, in addition to everything else that's going on, are there things going on in my body that are contributing to my emotions? And it's such as, I could keep giving you reasons, but for all those reasons and more, if you want to engage more skillfully with your emotions, you have to understand why they're complicated. And there are several reasons why they're complicated. And so just having a handle on that is going to help you. So first, understand why they're complicated. Here's the next one. We also need to understand what our emotions are communicating. Why they're complicated, what they're communicating. Here's Proverbs 13:12. It says, "A hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life." This particular proverb, it communicates how our hearts react to our longings. When our hopes or our longings are unfulfilled, or as the proverb says, deferred, our hearts are sick with sorrow. But when our hopes or longings are fulfilled, we feel like someone's just put life into us again, right? A tree of life. And so here's the key point. It's that your emotions communicate your longings. In fact, if there's anything to get for this morning, this is it. Your emotions communicate your longings. It's simply what they do. And your emotions are rich and complicated and varied precisely because your longings are rich and complicated and varied as a person made in the image of God. And so here are just a few of the emotions that we can experience. This is just a whirlwind tour. This is obviously only the tip of the iceberg. But what are some of our emotions communicate? How about the emotion of hurt? Hurt communicates our longing for healing and for wholeness. We already understand this when we're dealing with a physical injury. Right? If you've suffered a physical injury, why do I have this intense stinging in my knee? And then you look down and blood is gushing from your knee. Why do I feel this deep ache in my lower back? Did I overdo it? When you feel a physical pain, whether a stinging or an aching, you rightly ask yourself, what part of me is it that's hurting? And what does it need to be healed and whole? Well, in a similar way, sometimes you feel in your spirit a stinging or an aching. And when it's working properly, hurt asks you, it prompts you to ask yourself, what part of me is feeling this? And what is the pathway towards healing and wholeness. Maybe it just feels like my relationship with my grown-up kid is stinging. What would healing look like there? It's really easy to take hurt and to push it down by just kind of moving on more quickly, right? If we achieve enough and do enough and hurry enough, we don't have to feel that feeling called hurt. Here's another one, loneliness. Loneliness, it communicates our longing for relationship and intimacy. Our loneliness tells us that we're made in the image of a relational God who himself is not alone, but is a community of three persons, who desires for us not to feel and be alone. And so maybe some of you are here this morning, and for whatever reason, you feel lonely. I wonder if you've ever felt the need to hide your loneliness, because it just feels embarrassing or needy. Heavens no, I would never communicate that to someone else. And yet loneliness is such a gift because it's one of the key reminders of our design. It says you are designed to be in relationship with God and other people. And so loneliness, we can kind of push it down by either filling that void with trivial distractions or just a general sense of apathy. That's where I'm going to stand apart from everything, not just people. And so loneliness, it communicates our longing for relationship. Here's one, sadness. Sadness communicates our longing to honor what matters. God designed you as people who confer value. He designed you to look out on your life and see and name what is good, true, and beautiful, and then to heap honor on it. And ironically, it is often sadness that helps us do that better than anything else. Chip Dodd writes, tears are the gifts we give to those we love. And so when you grieve the loss of a friend or a loved one, what are you doing? You are honoring the fact that they matter. You're honoring that life itself matters. This is true even of the sadness you feel at like natural transitions in life. When you drop your 18-year-old off at college and you feel both grateful but also sad, that sadness is telling you childhood matters. That childhood is good, true, and beautiful. We live impoverished lives when we don't permit ourselves through sadness to recognize and then also honor what matters. Right? One of the ways we kind of push it down is just through bootstraps positivity. Right? I will talk myself into positive thinking. And there's some value in some ways, in some settings for that. And yet, if that's our default way of making it through life, we will have an impoverished heart. And so when you feel sad, you might ask yourself, what is my heart wanting to honor right now? Anger. Anger, it communicates our longing to contend for what ought to be. Anger, it's a catalyzing emotion when it's working correctly. We're made in the image of a righteous and a holy God, a God who himself fights for and contends for things as they ought to be. So like youth, when you're in school and someone's getting bullied, someone's reputation is being dragged through the mud. They're getting picked on, and you just find yourself silent, but also getting angry. Your anger is trying to tell you something. It's trying to tell you somehow, some way, things right now are not as they ought to be. That's what anger is communicating. It's also trying to catalyze you to rise up and contend for what ought to be. Jesus himself got angry, did he not? Right? He flipped over tables. He said angry words. He was angry when people were buying and selling in the temple because he said that isn't how it ought to be. It ought to be a house of prayer for all nations. And so when you feel angry, you might ask yourself, where am I being called into service? Where am I being galvanized to contend for what is right? That's anger. Fear. Fear communicates our longing to act wisely, to choose wisely. We talked about decisions last Sunday. Have you ever felt fear surrounding a big decision you need to make? Not all of that is bad. Fear tells us you have agency and your choices have consequences and other people's choices have consequences that matter and have an impact in the world. And so it's kind of, it's cueing us in to say, wow, this really matters. Now, fear can become a generalized sense of anxiety, which doesn't have the same sharpening effect in our lives, but fear, when it's working as it's supposed to, it sharpens us in this awareness that our decisions matter, that we have agency, and makes us long for those decisions to be good and to be wise. Guilt communicates our longing to be forgiven, to be reconciled. When you blow up at your friend or at your spouse or your kids and you kind of immediately feel guilty about it. That's your emotions working rightly. It's telling you, I just did something bad. That bad was real. It needs to be dealt with. It makes you have this longing for what you just did to be dealt with. And obviously, the step further than that is not just dealt with, but dealt with in the mode of forgiveness and reconciliation. And so we can also push down guilt, right? We can push it out through blame shifting. I'm just going to get it down and out into others so that I don't have to feel it. There's lots of ways of pushing down guilt, but it's a gift to us. Finally, joy or gladness. It communicates that a longing has actually been fulfilled. Now, that's just a sampling, obviously. Hurt, loneliness, sadness, anger, fear, guilt, joy. And maybe as I've said all this, you've heard this list, and your thought is, why did you only include one positive emotion in it, Ben? And my answer to you is, I didn't. Every one of those is a good emotion. Every one of those is meant to bless you when it's working the way it should. These are gifts to us because they're feedback loops. They communicate to us our humanity and the richness of what we are made to experience and long for, to long for healing and wholeness, for relationship, to honor what matters, to contend for what's good, to choose wisely, to be forgiven and reconciled. That's what it means to be a human being and not a robot in this world. And so you might take this list, it's probably not perfect. You could add a lot of things to this. You might parse it out slightly differently. There's probably a better way of putting it. And all I want you to see, though, is simply how rich the emotions you've been given are and how richly they communicate. You might ask, Ben, can't this go wrong? Like you're speaking of it as if it's only good all the time. Can our emotions not go wrong? Yes, they can. And yet, even then, I would argue, it's not that the emotion itself is wrong, but that the desire underneath it is wrong. Like I can get angry at my kids because they're taking so long to brush their teeth and get to bed, right? In that case, I wouldn't say the anger is right. And yet, even in that case, right, what is the anger saying? The anger is communicating to me that at least I feel like something isn't how it ought to be. They ought to be done with this already, and yet I've got, right? And so I'm supposed to rise up and fight for it, right? Rise up and hurry them along to bed via scolding. And yet the problem in this case, it's not that anger isn't doing what it's supposed to. It's sending me the exact feedback it's supposed to send me, but it's that my desire for them to be in bed by 7:45 and not 8:15 is not that important, right? It's not that great of an ought. And so even then my anger is working, my desires are off. Or you're in middle school and your mom takes away your cell phone and you feel sadness. Sadness says something that matters to me has been lost. In this case, your sadness, it's working exactly as it's supposed to. It's just that what matters to you maybe shouldn't matter to you as much as it does. And so even in this case, your emotions are working, your desires are misformed. Which actually shows us another reason why our emotions are so helpful. Because they can actually, even in the wrong context, they can be early warning signs to you that perhaps the desire is misformed or off. So all that to say, a hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. If you want to engage your emotions skillfully, you got to understand why they're complicated. Gave several reasons. You've also got to understand what they're communicating. Your emotions communicate your longings, and the emotionally skilled person will be growing in their ability to perceive what longing each emotion is communicating and whether that longing is good. Here's the third insight. We also need to understand how our emotions are cultivated. Like, what do we do with them when we're experiencing them? Do we always express them as much as we can because, like Pastor Ben just said, they are gifts to us? Or do we express them as little as possible because we've seen them get in the way? I like this word cultivate because it communicates a more nuanced approach. Some emotions at some times ought to be pruned or harnessed. Other emotions at other times ought to be expressed to the full. Sometimes, for example, Proverbs teaches us we cultivate our emotions by controlling them. Here's Proverbs 16:32. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit is better than he who takes a city. Now, we already talked about anger, right? We said anger is a gift to us. It galvanizes us to contend for what is right. But anger is a gift in the same way that fire is a gift, right? Fire can cook your food. Fire can warm your body. Fire can also burn your house down. And that's not a great example because most of us are responsible enough to be able to know where to draw the line between cooking our food and burning the house down. Most of us are not at serious risk of burning the house down every time you cook. And yet anger is much more dangerous than that, right? Anger is like trying to make ramen with a blowtorch, right? And so that's why, yes, Jesus got angry. Yes, there are positive uses of anger, and yet the overwhelming teaching of the Proverbs, frankly, of the rest of the scriptures as well, is it's better to err on the side of far slower to anger than far quicker. And don't you know this to be true, right? Like if I gave you no other information, would you rather have a bunch of coworkers who are super quick to get angry or super slow? Would you rather have an extended family who at the family reunion, they're slower to get angry or quicker to get angry, right? And here's another one, Proverbs 29:11. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. Once again, it's not saying this is bad to be a deeply emotive person. Not at all. But it is saying that the fool doesn't have any filter. The fool's not able to distinguish between when venting their spirit would be helpful and when it wouldn't. And so you might be really angry at something your coworker said at the meeting, and rightfully angry, and maybe you do need to relay that anger constructively to them, but perhaps it's better not to vent it right away. Maybe you actually need to let your spirit cool a bit and give it some space and formulate some words and not do it in the middle of the meeting, right? Or there might be 20 true things you want to say to your kids right now, but it might be wiser and more loving to say 3. And so a fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back, at least until they've had time to discern how to channel it wisely. Right, so just all this to say, in some settings, cultivating your emotions might mean harnessing them. In other settings, it might mean expressing them to the fullest possible extent. Here's a fascinating proverb, Proverbs 11. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perish, there are shouts of gladness. I think most directly this proverb is talking about the effect that the righteous and the wicked have on a community, but it can also tell us something about emotion. In many settings, it's right to let it all out. If a good person who's easy to root for succeeds, rejoice with them, right? If the wicked are punished, it's okay to shout with gladness. When your friend has been studying so hard for her exams and you know it's taken up so much of her life, and then she gets the score back and she passed, you can jump up and down. You can send her the text with all the exclamation marks and the emojis on it, and when she's sad, you can cry with her. In many settings, it's right. And so how do we know? Like, how do we know when cultivating our emotions looks a bit more like reining them in, when it looks a lot more like letting them all out? I mean, that's obviously where the skill lies, right? Here are just some questions you could think through. Is it appropriate? Is it helpful? Is it loving? Is it appropriate? By that I mean, is it appropriate to feel this emotion in this circumstance? I had a friend named Ralph several years ago. Ralph was in his 90s. He was cut from a different cloth. He was of a different generation. He was a veteran. He was an old school guy. Loved him. And I remember Ralph telling me a story once about a funeral that he attended. And Ralph attended a funeral for a family friend whose young son had died, I think like maybe the age of 12 or 13. It brought out lots of people in the church. Just a super sad situation. And Ralph was telling me about this funeral, and he said, Ben, everything in me just wanted to cry, but I kept it together for the family. And what he meant by that, of course, was that he thought it would be more loving not to cry. And what I wish Ralph was able to have done was cry, because it is appropriate to cry at a funeral, right? So for many of us, emotional growth will look like more often simply being freer to express our emotions, however that looks like physiologically for us and through the lens of our personality. It'll look like expressing them more fully when it's appropriate, which it almost always is. So is it appropriate? Is it helpful? There are some emotions that are appropriate, but might not be helpful exactly right now. Again, we mentioned anger. Just a few weeks ago, I had issues with my cell phone carrier. Like, good night. I was trying to port my number from one carrier to another, and oh my gosh, like talk about anger, right? Like there were some, but seriously, I feel like to some degree it was justified. There were things they had promised to do on a certain timeline. They had not done those things. They had broken a promise. They hadn't gotten back to me on it. It was dragging out days. And so in a way, yes, it was appropriate for me to feel angry, but it just wasn't helpful. Like no matter how much I vented to my wife and I cursed under my breath, AT&T was not porting that number over any quicker. No matter how many times I paced around my living room, it was not speeding up the process. It was spilling over into my family. It was spilling over into my kids. My wife was like, Ben, just go for a walk around the block. I'm like, that's not going to make it happen faster. And so sometimes there's an emotion that is appropriate but not helpful, right? It would have been wiser to take a walk, right? To do something constructive, because the anger was just not galvanizing me into any change. It wasn't even possible. And yet, what did I do, right? I kept reading customer service reviews from other people who experienced the same thing, you know? So you can ask, is it helpful? Here's one more. Is it loving? By this, I'm thinking of situations that are a bit fewer and further between. But perhaps you're feeling an emotion, and it may not always be loving to express it fully right there. So you receive great news, and you are thrilled about it. And you're at work, and you want to go tell everyone how thrilled about the news you received are. That's helpful. That's appropriate. But you also have a coworker that just received hard news. It may not be loving right there to share that. I don't want you to envision like this is happening all the time. I think we could probably err on the side of more expression, but it may at some cases not be loving. And so is it appropriate? Is it helpful? Is it loving? If it is, just let it out in the way that is you. And if it's not, you might hold back for a time. One of the most helpful definitions of emotional maturity I've seen is this. Emotional maturity, it's the ability to differentiate and properly identify one's emotions while granting yourself the freedom to experience whatever emotions appropriate to a given situation. This is what Proverbs kind of helps point us in the direction of. Remember all the way back in Proverbs chapter 1, we talked about this word insight. We said Proverbs gives us insight. Insight, it's being able to distinguish shades of difference where everyone else just sees black or white. Right? Everyone else just sees, let it all out there. You'd be you, or no, emotion's distracting. Proverbs gives you insight, shades of difference. And so if we want to engage our emotions more skillfully, we got to understand why they're complicated. We got to understand what they're communicating. We got to understand how they're cultivated. And then here's the last one, just as we finish. We've got to understand who they're crying out for. Who they're crying for. I want to return to Proverbs 13, same verse. A hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. This is our experience of life. Like on the one hand, when it says a hope deferred, you could be thinking of a specific hope, but on the other hand, isn't all of life a hope deferred? All of life is an experience of a longing yet unfulfilled. Life in this world, life until Jesus returns, is a hope deferred. And so for every one of you, I don't even know your story, but I know that your life, your emotional life, has a red underpainting to it because it is tinged with longing. Longing for the world as it once was, as it should have been, and as it one day will be. Melissa Cox is an author. She's not a Christian, but she captures this longing well. She says, I am homesick for a place I'm not even sure exists. One where my heart is full, and my body loved, and my soul understood. See, the great hope of the Christian faith is that that place that you're homesick for really does exist. And that hope won't be deferred forever. And yet even that's not the best way of putting it, because ultimately what your heart is crying for is not a where, but a who. See, Jesus is the object of your every longing, whether you've realized it or not, whether you've spoken it out or not. Jesus is the healing that your hurt is aching for. And he is the companionship that your loneliness is searching for. And Jesus is the valuable one, the pearl of great price, that your sadness is weeping for and desiring to confer honor upon. And he is the righteous one that your anger is burning for. And he is the wisdom that your fear is trembling for. He's obviously the guilt, the forgiveness from guilt that your guilt is looking for. He's the welcome that your shame wishes it could find. He's the bridegroom that your joy is longing to heap celebration upon. Jesus himself said, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. And whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. Saying you will find your longings satisfied in me. And that'll do something in you. And you will pour out blessing to others as a result. This is so much hope, friends. That for every emotion you have and every emotion you experience, there is a unique pathway to Jesus in it. And this is such a great thing to cling to as we navigate our own emotions. You won't do it perfectly. You might not understand why your emotions are so complicated. And you might not always understand what they're all communicating and how. And you might not always understand when and how to express them. But if you can just understand the who they're crying for, and that somehow, some way, in the end, they will all be fulfilled. That'll be a tree of life to you even now. And you can rest. And so we're going to sing one last song. We sang it before. It's called Here's My Heart. And the song is essentially a prayer. It's a prayer of offering ourselves to God in all of our confusion, in all of our mixed emotions. And so what we do in this song is we take the hearts that God has given us, confused as they are, sick with the underpainting of longing and of a hope deferred, and we basically just hand them to Jesus. And we say to them, here you go. Do something with this. The song repeats, here's my heart, Lord, speak what is true. And so you can make that your prayer in the midst of life. Here's my heart, Lord, speak what is true. Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, we thank you that you have made us so richly, with so many pathways to get to you, so many emotional lights on the dashboard, so many gifts to communicate our longings. Lord, I pray that as we sing this last song, you would fill us with your Holy Spirit, and we can offer our hearts back to you and ask you to speak what is true. So we do that all in your name. Amen.